Mark always said his boss was a force of nature. He used words like intense and brilliant and a complete bastard before his first coffee. From where I stood, usually in the corner of some crowded work party, trying to look invisible, Julian Thorne looked less like a force of nature and more like a gathering storm I was meant to avoid at all costs. I never imagined I'd end up walking right into the eye of it. My life was a carefully curated collection of quiet moments. The specific weight of my favorite blanket, the precise temperature of my morning tea, the predictable arc of the sun across my living room floor, illuminating dust motes in a slow, silent dance. It was a small kingdom, and I was its contented, solitary king. Then there was Julian. He was the disruption, the rogue variable in every equation. He existed in my world only as an anecdote for my best friend, Mark, or as a towering, granite-carved figure across a room. He was all sharp angles and dark clothing, a physical presence that seemed to absorb the light around him. His voice, when I overheard it, was a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards of my carefully constructed piece. For 2 years, this was the dynamic. Me, the observer in the shadows. Him, the celestial body with his own gravitational pull, blissfully unaware of the tiny satellite caught in his orbit. It was a pathetic, one-sided fascination, a secret I kept tucked away like a forbidden book. He was Mark's boss. He was, by all accounts, relentlessly straight. He was a fortress, and I didn't even have the courage to knock on the gate. The distance was a comfort, a necessary buffer. It allowed my crush to exist in a safe, theoretical space where it could do no harm. He was a painting in a museum I could admire from behind a velvet rope, beautiful and untouchable. The call came on a Tuesday. Tuesday was my gray sweatshirt day, my day for sorting freelance invoices, a day defined by its comforting lack of surprise. Leo, I need a massive life-or-death favor. Mark's voice was a frantic buzz in my ear. I could already feel the foundations of my quiet kingdom starting to tremble. His mother had fallen. A broken hip. He had to fly out that night, for God knows how long. The problem was the Athern Project, a career-defining architectural competition for Julian, with a submission deadline that was now terrifyingly close. Mark was his right-hand man, the one who translated Julian's chaotic genius into pristine, presentable data. He's going to kill me, Leo, and then he's going to lose the commission. He's been working on this for a year. What does this have to do with me? I asked, my heart starting a low, anxious thrum against my ribs. He needs help. Someone who understands his software, who can handle the rendering workload. He's up at his house in the mountains, no distractions. I told him you were the best I'd ever seen. My blood went cold. You did what? He wants to meet you. For dinner. Tonight. Thank you in advance. And to see if you're not a complete psycho at dinner. With Julian Thorne. The idea was so absurd, so far outside the realm of my reality, that I almost laughed. It felt like being told I was having a casual meal with a thunderstorm. And so, the routine was shattered. My quiet Tuesday was obliterated. I found myself standing in front of my closet, a fresh wave of panic washing over me with every rejected shirt. Everything I owned suddenly seemed too soft, too unassuming. I was trying to choose armor for a battle I had no idea how to fight. The restaurant was the kind of place where the silence was more expensive than the wine. Low lights, dark wood, hushed voices. It was Julian's territory. I felt like a field mouse in a lion's den. He was already there, at a corner table, a silhouette against the city lights. He stood when I approached, and the full force of his presence hit me. He was taller than I'd realized, broader. The photographs and distant sightings hadn't captured the sheer, solid reality of him. Lao, thanks for coming, he said. His voice was that same low rumble, but it wasn't angry. It was just deep, grounded. Of course. I'm sorry about Mark's mom. I managed my own voice sounding thin and reedy. We sat. The silence that fell between us was a physical weight. I busied myself with a napkin, folding and unfolding it into a nervous, misshapen wad. I was acutely aware of everything. The clink of ice in a nearby glass. The scent of his cologne, something clean and sharp like cedar and rain. The way his large, capable hands rested on the table. This was the man I had built into a myth in my head. And here he was, 3 feet away, looking at me with an expression of weary assessment. "Mark speaks very highly of your work," he began, breaking the tension. "He says you have an eye for detail that's almost pathological." I gave a weak, self-deprecating smile. "I think he meant that as a compliment. I do too," Julian said. And for the first time, a flicker of something other than stern professionalism crossed his face. A ghost of a smile. It changed the entire landscape of his features, softening the hard lines around his mouth. "Pathology is what this project needs. It's a monster." He talked about the project then. And as he spoke, the imposing boss dissolved, replaced by a passionate, fiercely intelligent artist. He described lines and forms, the play of light and shadow, with a reverence that I understood on a cellular level. He wasn't just building a structure. He was telling a story with glass and steel. I found myself leaning forward, asking questions, forgetting to be terrified. We were speaking the same language. For a few minutes, he wasn't the untouchable Julian Thorne. He was just a creator, talking to another creator. The forced proximity began the next morning. His house wasn't just in the mountains, it was of the mountains. All cedar and glass and stone, clinging to a cliffside with a view that could break your heart. It was isolated, beautiful, and utterly intimidating, just like its owner. The workspace was a vast studio with a floor-to-ceiling window that framed the entire valley. Blueprints and sketches were scattered across every surface like fallen leaves. It was the organized chaos of a brilliant mind, and I was being dropped directly into the center of it. "Coffee," he grunted, not looking up from a large monitor where a complex 3D model was rotating slowly. "Please." He moved to a sleek, industrial machine, his movements economical and precise. He didn't ask how I took it. He just handed me a heavy ceramic mug filled with black, potent-smelling coffee. He'd remembered from the restaurant. My stomach did a nervous little flip. It was a tiny detail, but my brain seized on it, cataloging it as evidence. Evidence of what? I wasn't sure. The first few hours were a strange, silent dance. We worked at opposite ends of a massive oak table, the only sounds the clicking of our mice and the low hum of the computers. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was charged, humming with unspoken things. I felt like I was under a microscope. I could feel his occasional glance, a quick, assessing look that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I tried to focus on the work, losing myself in the familiar grid lines and rendering algorithms. This was my safe space. But my awareness of him was a constant, low-grade hum beneath the surface of my concentration. I noticed the way he'd run a hand through his dark hair when he was frustrated, leaving it slightly disheveled. I noticed the faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a detail I'd never seen from distance. I saw the weariness in him, the dark smudges under his eyes that his formidable energy couldn't quite hide. I saw the tension coiled in his shoulders as he leaned over the screen, the fate of his creation resting on them. The granite statue was showing its cracks. He wasn't a storm. He was just a man. A tired, stressed, incredibly talented man. The afternoon wore on. The sun dipped below the peaks, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. The studio was cast in a warm, dim light. "I can't get this texture to map correctly," he muttered, the words sharp with frustration. It was the first thing he'd said in 3 hours. "The software is fighting me." I hesitated. "Which one are you using?" He named a notoriously finicky program, one I happened to know like the back of my hand. I got up, my legs stiff, and walked over to his workstation. The air around him was warm, still scented with that cedar cologne and coffee. Standing this close to him felt like a violation of some unspoken rule. "Can I?" I asked, gesturing to his mouse. He leaned back in his chair, conceding the space. He folded his arms across his broad chest, watching me. I was so close, I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the intricate pattern of gray in his dark hair at the temples. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. My fingers felt clumsy on his mouse, my mind struggling to focus on the screen instead of the solid wall of warmth that was his body right next to mine. It's a glitch in the UVW unwrap. I explained, my voice steadier than I felt. You have to collapse the stack before you apply the modifier. I clicked through a series of menus, my movements sure and practiced. The texture snapped into place, perfectly wrapping around the complex curve of the digital model. There, I said a little breathlessly. He was silent for a long moment. I risked a glance at him. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at me, his expression unreadable. How did you know that? He asked, his voice quiet. I spent a lot of time with this program. It's kind of my thing. He leaned forward, taking the mouse back from me. His fingers brushed against mine. It was nothing. An accident. A flicker of contact that lasted less than a second. But for me, it was a lightning strike. A jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity shot up my arm, short-circuiting my brain. Heat bloomed in my chest, spreading through my veins like wildfire. My breath hitched. It was the briefest of touches, completely unintentional, but it was the first time we had made physical contact, and my body reacted like it had been starved. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned, my cheeks flushing hot. I mumbled something about getting more coffee and practically fled to the other side of the room, my back to him. I gripped the counter of the kitchenette, my knuckles white, trying to will my heart to slow down. Get it together, Leo. It was nothing. Absolutely nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was a crack in the dam. A single, tiny fissure through which years of suppressed longing came rushing. When I returned to my workstation, the atmosphere had changed. The silence was different now. It was no longer just professional distance. It felt aware. I couldn't look at him. I kept my eyes glued to my monitor, but all I could feel was the ghost of his touch on my skin. The dynamic had shifted. When he'd asked for my help with the software, he had ceded a small piece of his authority. He, the brilliant architect, had needed something from me, the quiet freelance designer. For a moment, I wasn't just the helpful subordinate, the friend of a friend. I was an expert. I had something he needed. It was a small thing, but it leveled the ground we were standing on. He was no longer just a figure to be admired from afar. He was a man who got frustrated with technology, who had a scar above his eye, whose fingers were warm when they brushed against mine. The fortress had a door, and I had just accidentally brushed against it. The next day, the tension was a palpable entity in the room. A third person sitting at the table with us. We were polite. Excessively so. We passed the milk for the coffee, without comment. We discussed file formats with a rigid formality. But underneath it all, that single, accidental touch shimmered in the air between us. Late in the afternoon, I noticed him rubbing his temples, his face pale and tight. He'd been squinting at the screen for hours, a deep line etched between his brows. "Are you okay?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He flinched, as if surprised I had spoken. "Fine. Just a headache, but it was clearly more than that." A few minutes later, he pushed his chair back with a low groan and stood up, swaying slightly. "I think I need some air," he said, his voice strained. He took 2 steps towards the large glass door that led to a balcony, and then stopped, pressing the heels of his hands into his eyes. "Julian, it's a migraine," he finally admitted, the words clipped. "I get them sometimes." The light, he looked genuinely ill. The formidable strength that was so much a part of him had evaporated, leaving behind a raw vulnerability that was startling to witness. The power dynamic didn't just shift, it completely inverted. He was the one who needed help. "Sit down," I said, my voice firm with a surprising authority. "I'll get you something." He didn't argue. He sank back in his chair, looking utterly defeated. I found a glass and filled it with water, my hands moving with a purpose I didn't know I possessed. I searched the sleek, minimalist kitchen for a first aid kit, eventually finding it tucked away in a drawer. I found painkillers and handed them to him. "Here. And you need to be in the dark, the deadline," he started to protest. "The deadline can wait an hour," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Go lie down. I'll keep working. I know what needs to be done." He looked at me, his eyes clouded with pain, but also with something else. "Surprise? Gratitude?" He finally gave a slow, reluctant nod. He rose and walked unsteadily out of the studio and down a hallway. I went around the room, lowering the blinds, plunging the studio into a cool, gray twilight. The silence that descended was different again. It was the quiet of a sick room, a space of care. I sat back down on my workstation, but my focus wasn't entirely on the screen. A part of my awareness was tuned to the hallway, listening for any sound from him. I was no longer the intimidated guest. I was the caretaker, the responsible one. I was in his house, in charge of his project, while he was at his most vulnerable. The magnificent, untouchable Julian Thorne was laid low by a migraine, and I was the one bringing him water. The absurdity of it was not lost on me. But mixed with the absurdity was a strange, fierce tenderness that tightened my chest. An hour later, he reappeared in the doorway, looking pale but less pained. His hair was messy, and he was wearing a soft gray t-shirt instead of his crisp button-down. He looked younger, softer. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and a little rough. "That helped, don't mention it," I replied, trying to sound casual, as if my entire world hadn't just been tilted on its axis. He didn't return to his computer. Instead, he pulled a chair over near mine, sitting in the dim light, just watching me work. It should have made me nervous, but it didn't. His presence felt less like an evaluation and more like companionship. We worked like that for hours as the evening deepened outside. The quiet between us was finally comfortable, a shared space rather than an empty one. The storm that had been brewing between us had broken, leaving this strange, calm twilight in its wake. The third night was the turning point. We were on the final push, the deadline looming like a guillotine. A real storm had rolled in from the west, a furious, black-bellied tempest that threw sheets of rain against the glass walls of the studio. The wind howled around the corners of the house, a mournful, wild sound. We had ordered pizza, eating it straight from the box while we worked, the easy domesticity of the act feeling both strange and perfectly natural. The project was almost done. The final renderings were processing, the fans of our computers whirring in a desperate race against time. There was nothing left to do but wait. And then the lights flickered, once, twice, and went out. The studio was plunged into an abrupt, shocking darkness. The only light was the faint, ghostly glow of our laptop screens and the frantic, electric blue flashes of lightning that illuminated the thrashing trees outside. The hum of the computers died, replaced by the roar of the storm and the sudden, deafening sound of my own heartbeat. "Damn it," Julian swore softly in the dark. "The generator should have kicked in a beat of silence." "It won't," he said, his voice flat with realization. "The fuel line must have frozen in that cold snap last week. I forgot to check it. We were stranded, in the dark, on top of a mountain, in the middle of a thunderstorm. The carefully constructed professional boundary that we had been rebuilding dissolved into nothing. We were just two people trapped in a glass box, surrounded by a raging storm. "I have candles," he said, his voice now closer. I could hear him moving, a dark shape in the darkness. There was the scrape of a drawer opening, the rustle of a box. A moment later, a small, brave flame flickered to life, and Julian's face was illuminated, all sharp shadows and golden light. He lit a few more, placing them around the room. The candlelight cast a warm, intimate glow, turning the sleek, modern studio into something ancient and cavernous. The storm outside felt like a wild beast trying to get in, and this small circle of light was our only sanctuary. We abandoned the dead computers and gravitated toward the stone fireplace at the other end of the room. Julian expertly laid a fire, and soon a crackling blaze was pushing back the chill. We sat on the thick rug in front of it, the heat warming my face. The silence returned, but this time it was heavy with meaning, thick with all the things we hadn't said. "I'm sorry about this," he said, breaking the quiet. He was staring into the flames, his profile stark and beautiful in the firelight. "This whole week, dragging you up here, the pressure, now this, it's okay," I said, and I meant it. "The project is done. We just have to hit send when the power comes back." He was quiet for a long time, watching the fire dance. The storm raged on. "It's not just the project," he finally said, his voice so low I had to strain to hear it over the wind. "The pressure is constant, from the clients, the firm, from myself mostly. This feeling that if I stop moving, even for a second, I'll just collapse. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and unexpected. This was the first real crack in the fortress. He was showing me the man inside, the one who was tired and afraid. I think everyone feels like that sometimes, I offered quietly. He turned his head, his dark eyes finding mine in the flickering light. Do you? And suddenly, I wanted to be honest. The isolation, the fire, his vulnerability, it created a space where the truth felt possible. All the time, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. My whole life is structured to avoid it. My routines, my apartment, working from home. It's all just a way to feel in control. To keep from falling apart. He didn't say anything. He just watched me, his gaze intense, searching. It felt like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as Mark's friend or the helpful tech guy, but as me. Lau, you're not what I expected, he said softly. My heart stuttered. What did you expect? I don't know. Mark talks about you, but he talks about your work, your skill. He never said. He trailed off, looking back at the fire. He never said you were quiet. Not shy, just quiet. Like you're listening to the whole world at once. My throat felt tight. He saw me. He actually saw me. I've been so wrapped up in this project, in my own head, he continued, his voice laced with a self-recrimination that twisted my gut. For years. I look up, and I don't recognize anything. I have this big, empty house. I have awards. And I'm completely, utterly alone. The word alone landed between us like a stone. It was a word I knew intimately. It was the name of my kingdom. I didn't know what to say. So I just stayed quiet, letting his confession breathe in the warm, fire-lit air. He had given me a piece of his truth, and I held it carefully. He shifted on the rug, turning to face me more fully. The space between us shrank. It was now just a few inches of charged air. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the faint scent of wood smoke clinging to his clothes. This week, he said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a rough, intimate murmur. Having you here, it's been the first time in a long time that the house hasn't felt empty, my breath caught in my throat. My heart was no longer a frantic bird. It was a battering ram against my ribs, trying to break free. This was it, the precipice. He was looking at my mouth. My mind went completely, blissfully blank. All the anxieties, all the overthinking, it all just evaporated, burned away by the heat in his gaze. There was only this moment, this fire, this man. He leaned in, slowly, hesitantly. It wasn't a move of conquest or confidence. It was a question. His eyes searched mine, asking for permission. I gave it with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. And then his lips were on mine. It was impossibly gentle. Tentative. A soft, warm pressure that was more about discovery than desire. It was hesitant and questioning and so deeply, profoundly honest that it made my eyes burn. It wasn't the frantic, passionate kiss I might have dreamed of, but something far more real, far more intimate. It was a conversation without words. He pulled back a fraction of an inch, his forehead resting against mine. His breath was warm on my skin. Leo, he whispered, my name a sound of wonder and confusion. I didn't answer. I just closed the small distance between us again, my hand coming up to cup the back of his neck, my fingers tangling in his soft hair. This kiss was deeper, a slow, melting surrender from both of us. It was the taste of coffee and wood smoke and loneliness and a desperate, burgeoning hope. It was the collapse of 1,000 walls at once. In the heart of the storm, surrounded by darkness, I had found the eye, and it was quiet, and it was safe, and it was him. I woke to the pale, gray light of dawn, and to silence. The storm had passed. The wind was gone. The only sound was the gentle hiss of dying embers in the fireplace. And I was alone. I was wrapped in a thick blanket on the rug, but the space next to me was empty. Julian was gone. A cold, sharp dread pierced through the warm, hazy memory of the night before. I sat up, my body aching slightly. A quick glance around the studio showed that the power was back on. The digital clocks on the appliances glowed with accusing green numbers. The laptops were open on the table, their screens bright. The project files had been sent. A single email, time-stamped at 5:14 a.m. my stomach filled with a swarm of angry bees. He had gotten up while I slept, finished the work, and sent it. Without me. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and walked through the quiet house. His bedroom door was closed. I listened, holding my breath, but heard nothing. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of avoidance, the silence of regret. The morning after anxiety I knew so well crashed over me in a suffocating wave. It was a mistake, all of it. For him, it was a moment of weakness, a stress-induced anomaly brought on by the deadline and the storm. A strange intimacy born of isolation that had evaporated in the clear light of day. For me, it had been a revelation. For him, it was an error to be corrected. The shame was a physical heat on my skin. I felt foolish, naive. I had let my guard down completely, offered up my soft, vulnerable heart. And he had what? Panicked? Realized what a colossal mistake he'd made kissing his friend's quiet, unassuming gay friend? My carefully constructed kingdom was in ruins around my feet. I couldn't face him. I couldn't bear the awkward conversation, the gentle letdown, the pretense that last night was just a weird fluke. So I ran. I scribbled a quick, pathetic note. Power's back. Glad we finished the project. Had to get home. Thanks for everything. Leo, the words were so bland, so cowardly, they made me sick. I gathered my things, my movements frantic and clumsy. I didn't let myself look at the spot on the rug by the fireplace. I called the car service, my voice trembling, and waited on the porch in the cold morning air, not daring to go back inside. The drive back down the mountain was a blur of self-recrimination. Every word, every touch from the night before was now replayed in my mind. But this time it was all filtered through the lens of humiliation. I had misread everything. I had built a fantasy out of firelight and a lonely confession. I got back to my apartment, and the silence I had once cultivated as a sanctuary now felt like a tomb. It was an active, oppressive absence. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was empty. It was filled with the ghost of him. My routine, my safe, predictable world, felt hollow and meaningless. He had walked into my life, set it on fire, and then walked away, leaving me to sift through the ashes. A day passed. Then two. The silence from him was absolute. No text, no call, no email, nothing. Mark called, ecstatic, his voice buzzing with relief. His mom was fine, recovering well. And Julian had won the Atherton competition. He told me you were incredible, Leo. A total lifesaver. Said he couldn't have done it without you. I made the right noises, congratulations and feigned modesty, but every word was a knife twisting in my gut. He was praising my work, my professionalism. It was a clear, unspoken message. Let's pretend that last night never happened. Let's go back to our designated boxes. You are the skilled designer. I am the grateful client. The old solitude I had cherished was now tainted. It was loneliness, a deep, aching loneliness that I had successfully kept at bay for years, but which he had exposed with a single, hesitant kiss. I had been content in my small kingdom because I didn't know what I was missing. Now I knew, and the knowing was a constant, dull pain in my chest. I tried to go back to my routine. I drank my tea at the correct temperature. I sat in my chair and watched the sun move across the floor. But the peace was gone. The dust motes dancing in the light no longer looked beautiful. They just looked like dust. On the third night, I was curled up on my sofa, wrapped in my favorite blanket, trying to read a book but just staring at the same sentence over and over when the buzzer rang. My heart leaped into my throat. It was late. I wasn't expecting anyone. I pressed the intercom button, my hands shaking. Hello. A pause. And then his voice. That deep, unmistakable rumble, tinny and distorted through the small speaker. But it was him. Now, it's Julian. Can I come up? My mind raced. 1,000 scenarios played out in a split second. He was here to apologize formally. To pay me. To tell me to my face to forget what happened. Every single one of them ended in more heartbreak. A part of me, the cowardly, self-protective part, wanted to say no, to pretend I wasn't home. But the part of me that had come alive in the firelight, the part that had felt his lips on mine, was stronger. Okay, I breathe and buzz him in. The few moments it took for him to come up the stairs were the longest of my life. I stood in the middle of my living room, my arms wrapped around myself, bracing for impact. He knocked on the door. A soft, hesitant sound. I opened it. He was just standing there in the hallway. He looked terrible, more tired than I had ever seen him, his hair a mess, his clothes rumpled, as if he'd been driving for hours or hadn't slept in days. The formidable architect was gone. This was just a man, looking lost and exhausted and utterly vulnerable. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with a tumultuous mix of regret and something else I couldn't name. "You left," he finally said, his voice quiet and rough. "The project was done," I replied, my own voice a weak defense. "That's not why you left," he stated. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple, painful fact. I couldn't meet his eyes. I just stared at a spot on his shoulder. "Can I come in?" he asked again. I stepped back, letting him into my space. My small, quiet kingdom. He seemed to fill the entire room, his presence a stark contrast to my muted, carefully ordered life. He looked around slowly, at my bookshelves, at the half-finished painting on an easel in the corner, at the worn-out armchair by the window. He was seeing my life, the real me, laid bare. "I'm an idiot, Leo," he said, turning back to me. His voice was raw. "I'm a complete and utter coward." I finally looked at him. The confusion, the pain, it was all there on his face. "When I woke up," he began, his gaze fixed on mine, and the power was back. My first thought was the deadline. It's instinct. Years of it. Just work. Fix the problem. Get it done. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "And then I looked over, and you were asleep. And you looked so peaceful." And I panicked. Everything from the night before came rushing back, and it was a lot. It was more than I've let myself feel in a decade. He took a step closer. I held my ground, my heart hammering. My whole life, I've had a plan, a blueprint. And you're not in the blueprint, Leo. None of this is. And it terrified me. My default setting when I'm scared is to retreat, to build walls, to focus on the one thing I know how to control, which is my work. His honesty was disarming, stripping away all my prepared defenses. So I sent the files, and I hid in my office. And when I finally got my head straight and came out to talk to you, you were gone. Your note, it was so polite, so distant. I thought I had ruined everything, that I had scared you off, that you regretted it as much as I was pretending to. He took another step. We were so close now. I could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. "These last 2 days," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Living in that house, that silence you left behind, it's been unbearable. I won the biggest commission of my career, and I couldn't feel a thing. Because the only thing I could think about was that I had let you walk out the door, the swarm of bees in my stomach quieted, replaced by a fragile, fluttering hope. I was scared too. I confessed, the words tearing from my throat. I woke up alone and I thought it was a mistake for you. That I was the mistake. No," he said, the word firm, absolute. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before it came to rest on my arm. His touch was electric, just like the first time, but this time it was deliberate, grounding. "No, Leo, you're the only thing that has felt real in a very, very long time." He looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at my face. "This is new territory for me. All of it. I don't know the rules. I don't have a map, and it's frightening. But the thought of not trying to explore it with you, that's infinitely worse." Tears pricked at the back of my eyes. All the anxiety, the fear, the loneliness of the past few days, it all just washed away, replaced by a profound, bone-deep relief. "Okay," I whispered. He searched my face. Okay. I repeated, a real smile, shaky but genuine, finally breaking through. New territory. No map. A slow smile spread across his face. The real one. The one that changed everything. It reached his eyes, crinkling the tired skin at the corners. He looked from my eyes to my mouth and back again. Is it okay if I kiss you again?" he asked, his voice full of a vulnerability I never would have thought him capable of. "When there's no storm, no deadline, just here, now." I didn't answer with words. I leaned in and kissed him, and this kiss was different from all the others. It wasn't hesitant or questioning. It wasn't born of desperation or loneliness. It was a promise, a choice, the first step into uncharted land taken together. He pulled back after a moment, his forehead resting against mine. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, solitary key, pressing it into my palm. It was the key to his house, the fortress. Just in case, he murmured against my skin, the silence gets too loud again. For either of us, the weight of the metal in my hand was heavy, solid, a tangible act of commitment, an anchor in the storm. The morning light that filters through my bedroom window is different now. It used to be the starting gun for another day of solitude, another lap in my predictable routine. Now it's just light, and it's warm. I woke up to the smell of coffee. Not my own carefully prepared brew, but something richer, darker. I opened my eyes and saw Julian standing by my small kitchen counter, wearing a pair of my gray sweatpants that were far too short on him, focused intently on my French press as if it were a complex architectural model. He looked over his shoulder and saw me awake. That slow, easy smile spread across his face. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. The sight of him there in my space, so comfortable and real, sent a wave of quiet joy through me that was so profound it almost hurt. There was no anxiety, no fear of him disappearing, just a deep, settled peace. He brought 2 mugs over to the bed, handing one to me. Our fingers brushed, and the jolt was still there, but now it was a familiar, welcome current. We sat there, propped up against the pillows, sipping coffee in a comfortable silence, watching the dust motes dance in the sunbeams. It wasn't a grand, cinematic romance. It was something quieter, deeper. It was in the way he'd reach for my hand while we were driving. It was in the way I'd find myself sketching his profile in the margins of my notebooks. It was learning the precise rhythm of his breathing as he slept beside me, a sound that had replaced silence as my favorite thing to fall asleep to. My quiet little kingdom hadn't been conquered. Its borders had just expanded. It was no longer a fortress designed to keep the world out, but a home with the door wide open. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the disruption that didn't break my life, but broke it open. He took my small, safe, monochrome world and flooded it with color and chaos and warmth. He was the storm, and I'd spent my whole life hiding from the rain, never realizing it was what I needed to grow. The fear isn't entirely gone, of course. It's still there, a quiet hum in the background, a reminder of what's at stake. But it's dwarfed by this new, astonishing thing. This love. I used to be an observer, watching life from a safe distance. Now, I'm in the heart of it, and I wouldn't go back to the silence for anything. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many of us build walls to keep ourselves safe, without ever realizing that the real danger is living a life where nothing can ever get in? What walls have you built in your own life? And what would it take for you to open the door? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story and want to explore more journeys of the heart, please consider subscribing for more.